Hey everybody, my name is Paul Eston Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. We're streaming live simultaneously in 3 different locations on the Heavy on Jets Facebook page to 30,000 New York Jet fans. Thanks for joining us. My YouTube channel, youtube.com/BoyGreen25, baby, and newly a part of the 10K Club on Twitter. Yes, I'm a big deal. Thanks for asking. So make sure you guys follow there as well at BoyGreen25. And this episode is a special episode with a special guest. Zack Rosenblatt of The Athletic is going to join us. And in the description down below on YouTube, you guys can read his full article. It is the plan on what the Jets should and need to do this offseason with all kinds of scoops and insight. We'll talk about it. But you guys can read along while we're going through this if you like. Again, the Athletic article down below. So without further ado, let's bring him in. Zack Rosenblatt. What's up, brother?
Not much, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm going to be honest. I go to my favorite movie of all time, Tommy Boy, for a lot of things in my life. But when I hear the plan, it's almost like I have David Spade going, yikes. But nonetheless, let's dive into this plan, Zack, and let's go through a couple of things here. First off, right off the bat, your number one step, and really for a lot of fans, is finding the right offensive coordinator for the New York Jets. They've interviewed a lot of guys. They've been denied by a few other guys. It sounds like my dating history here. And you say in this that the search is far from over as they're kind of diving through here. You say in there that there really isn't a front runner at this point, but like when do you let's talk timing first. When do you expect this to kind of find its way out here? Because it feels like it's been going on forever already.
Yeah, I don't really know if there's an end date. I think they're just going to try and find who they can. I think they are running into some of the snags that you would have expected when this process started. Questions about who the quarterback's going to be, job security, things like that. Like I think that has been a real issue in Salah's interviews and people that he's been talking to. So I don't know if anybody they've interviewed so far is necessarily going to be the guy, is what I would say. But there are some interesting candidates in there. But it's a matter of both sides wanting it. Whoever comes in is going to basically have, carte blanche to create their own offense here because I think they're committed to making changes. So, in a way, you're going to be starting from scratch, which either could be appealing or not if you don't have the job security. There's a lot of factors that play into it. But, yeah, I don't really have a read on who the favorite would be. I think Hackett is an interesting one, but I don't know if he necessarily wants to coach right away after everything that went down in Denver. I think Kevin Patullo is pretty well liked. There's some other interesting names. And like I mentioned in the article, I think they want to talk to Frank Reich, but I'd be surprised if he took this job. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a long process. I don't think they're in a rush. But, yeah, I mean, I don't really – it's not going to be – I don't think fans are going to be very excited about how this plays out. But that's kind of why, as I wrote before the end of the season, that they probably shouldn't move on from LaFleur because grass isn't always greener. I think you're seeing that already.
Fair enough. I will say that you mentioned Frank Reich, and I know that there is the caveat on all of this that you reported weeks ago that, like, sure, he's this sexy name, but it's unlikely for all these reasons. First off, he's interviewing for head coaching opportunities, but you do say in the piece, this one again, the link is down below for The Athletic. It's absolutely spectacular, so you guys should be reading it as we speak and as we kind of go through this, that if he does not land one of those gigs, perhaps he could interview. You say that the Jets are interested in Frank Reich, and I'm sure a lot of people would be. Again, former Jets quarterback from the 90s, for those of us in our audience who remember the connection to Joe Douglas with the Philadelphia Eagles. It does seem like if you squint, I mean, there's some ties here that could make a lot of sense.
Yeah, for sure. But I think I heard somewhere, and I don't know how accurate this is, that he's not as involved with like the game planning side of things. So I think you'd have to bring in somebody who would do that stuff. And again, like, I don't know. I don't know if this job would be as appealing as maybe some other ones that he could get as an offensive coordinator, even, if the Chargers were interested in him or like one of those other jobs. But I don't know. It's a long shot, but who knows? Weirder things have happened. And I think that's the one that fans would celebrate more than any others, obviously. So that'll be, if they get him, then the Jets probably become more appealing for, offensive free agents and stuff like that as well. But I'd be surprised if we're sitting here in a month from now and Frank Reich is our offensive coordinator, I would say.
Let me ask you about this because that's a good point. I've heard a lot of fans, not everyone is on the Frank Reich bandwagon. I have a lot of Jet fans among my Twitter followers and other avenues where they say it was Doug Peterson's show in Philadelphia, not Frank Reich, so he doesn't deserve credit for this and that. But whether using him as an example or not, candidates in general that have not called plays, or let's use Kevin Patullo as an example because he was the quarterback coach for the Jets. So when we go back to 2015, 2016, the Eagles, he's the passing game coordinator. So a lot of the responsibilities for an offense are divvied up in a lot of different ways. How does that make someone attractive or less attractive when you're interpreting a candidate? And maybe he didn't call plays, or maybe he didn't do that, but you're trying to interpret on what he can be for your team, and then potentially what you can kind of pair him up with, potentially with that senior assistant Robert Saleh mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be a tricky balance, and I don't think it would be a great look if they hired somebody who doesn't call plays after, just going through the whole
Right.
shebang with LaFleur when he came in here and he didn't have that experience. But I think ultimately they're gonna try and just get the best candidate and then figure out the rest after. Obviously, they're whoever's the candidates in theory are coming in with a plan and how they would attack everything and all that. But ultimately, getting rid of LaFleur was a risk to begin with, and whoever they hire is going to be a risk because they're not going to get, like I said, I don't think they're going to get like somebody that you're, no doubt offensive coordinator. Otherwise, this job wouldn't be open. Like the fact that it's open means that there's something wrong. So
Right. Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
yeah, so I don't, it's not, yeah, I don't know if it's going to be somebody who has play calling experience. Maybe it will. You would hope it will be, but I can't say for certain that it will be.
All right, Zach, take us behind the scenes here with you, and every other journalist has this. I don't know if it's a physical thing or it's just in your mind, the BS meter. So I ask you, so we bring up Michael Flohr, right? So, like, he was fired earlier in the day. That's what Aaron Wilson said. And then all of a sudden, wait, no, he's not. And then, well, it's mutually parting of ways. So, like, when you're filtered, because you have a lot of sources and you have to filter information and determine what's real and what's not. Like draft time, we bring that up with our draft insiders that come on, and a team will tell them this and they're like, well, that's not true. I'm not going to report that because there's no way that's real. I have to back that up through this source or this source or this source. So how did that work? Let's go like directly to the Michael Flohr thing. You had another great article last week. I mean, you're just dropping bombs, batting 1,000 over there at the Athletic, Mr. Zack Rosenblatt, with all these gosh darn great pieces, baby. But on the Michael Flohr thing, so like mutually parting of ways, explaining also your BS meter in general, what you have to have for this job, but also in that in particular, what did you read on that when you heard that come down the pike?
Uh, I don't know that it was necessarily BS, but I do think that it was heading towards them parting ways. And as teams started to call expressing interest, I think Salah said, you know what, let's just mutually, let's just both agree that it's best for us to, go our separate ways. I think the fact that they clearly didn't have a plan for who they were going to place him with, I think is all the evidence you need of whether this was actually, mutual or not kind of thing, like, or if they really wanted to do this. Um, I think the perception that Salah was forced to fire him is off. And then from what I've heard, I think it wouldn't surprise me if he felt like pressure to make significant changes. And if that involved, whether that's the floor getting fired or, giving someone like part of his responsibilities and taking some away from him, like things like that wouldn't surprise me. But ultimately, I think it's clear they decided to move on from him, and because they realized how everything that was wrong with the offense and everything that went wrong with Zach Wilson. And I think my article kind of showed a lot of the role LaFleur had in that. Um, and so now they go forward, and you hope you find somebody who can get this thing going quickly because they are on a ticking clock. This coaching staff, I think they believe, they've been told that they have time, but whether they actually do will depend on how this season goes. And if they don't get the right quarterback and the right OC, then we're going to be looking at a new staff again next year, unfortunately.
I think you're right. Again, we're speaking with Zach Rosenblatt here of The Athletic. We're 9 minutes in this thing. We're already getting Connor Hughes shots indirectly from Hojo on YouTube. Imagine how much quality writing you could pump out when you aren't playing golf. I can only imagine who you're talking about. Mr. Hojo joining us here on YouTube. Very nice. I'm sure our bonus points for the anti-Connor Hughes people, which, by the way, we'll have Connor Hughes on in a couple weeks, which will be nice. Let's go back to your plan for the article, and it's, of course, finding the quarterback and what you have advocated for and talk about in your piece is Derek Carr. He's the less sexy option, I guess, among fans right now, because for a short time he had kind of a nice run. Then, oh wait, Lamar Jackson's possible. Oh wait, Aaron Rodgers is possible. So Derek Carr has kind of fallen by the wayside here. Why do you believe that is the guy for the New York Jets as they're trying to, figure out and ascertain who is the best option at quarterback, and plus ripple effects and contract and all these other scenarios to build the rest of the team around him?
I think ultimately all the other options, while sexy, I'm not sure are as realistic. And I think if you don't wind up with Derek Carr, then very quickly the well is going to dry out. So I know that Aaron Rodgers is the popular thing right now. I think ultimately it's going to come down to whether he wants to come to the Jets more than if the Jets want him, because I think they obviously would go and get him if he was actually available. But does he want to come to the Jets? I think that's a legit question. They'll have to figure out, because from his perspective, I know everybody thinks the Jets are a quarterback away from the playoffs, but are the Jets a quarterback away from the Super Bowl? I'm not so sure about that. They still have to fix the O-line. They still have some holes on defense. They're going to have to cut some guys. So you're going to have to fill those guys' roles on the roster. And so I don't think they're necessarily – I think Rodgers would maybe put them in better position to feel like they were contenders. But does Rodgers look at this as better than – I don't know what his other options are right now, but does he look at the Jets as a chance to go and get a Super Bowl when it's age 39? Is it worth the trouble for him? Those are all things. Who's the offensive coordinator? What does the offense look like? Would they let Rodgers factor into that decision? If they got him first or something like that. These are all things that are factors there. So let's say you don't get Rodgers. I don't think Brady's realistic. I don't think Lamar is realistic. And so you come down to, all right, if you don't get Derek Carr, your options are Jimmy G, who I don't think is as appealing anymore with the new offense and with his injury history. Ryan Tannehill, I think he's fine NFL quarterback. I don't know if he moves the needle necessarily. I mean, maybe for a year. And then you start getting into the guys who are kind of borderline starters, like Baker Mayfield and Jacoby Brissett and Mike White and guys like that. So I think it's Derek Carr. It's not Derek Carr or bust, but I think it's Derek Carr or you don't feel very good about your quarterback situation going into the year, unless they really loved somebody in this draft, I guess. But they're in a weird spot at 13 where you're probably just out of the range of C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. You're probably more in the Will Levis range, but he seems like another guy who might be like a Zach Wilson type project. You're not drafting a project to a team that needs a quarterback right now. So I just think Derek Carr makes the most sense just in terms of who you're going to get that's better than him. And if you're not going to be able to actually get Rodgers, then I think you need to try and do your best to convince Derek Carr that he should come to the Jets.
Let's stay on the Derek Carr thing for a second. It's interesting. Derek Carr has not performed well in cold weather games. Shout out to Rich Samini, who had the specific stat from ESPN Stats and Information. It's games of 40 degrees or less. There's basically a 15 to 20 game sample size of those games because, historically speaking, Derek Carr played at Fresno State, which, by the way, for those that don't know, California, Oakland, which was in California, and then Vegas out there on the West Coast too. So I ask you, Zach, just on pushback on that, you mentioned it in your Athletic piece, which again is linked down below as well. Is there enough of a sample size there that whether he was awesome in cold weather or sucked in cold weather, that either way, because it's such a small sample size compared to the rest of his career, is that even enough to move the needle to matter in the grand scheme of evaluating Derek Carr as whether he should be the guy or not for the Jets?
I've talked about that on our podcast, and I actually was on Will Parkinson's today. I don't know if that went up yet. We talked about it too. I think that's a little overblown because as you mentioned, and you kind of hit it. When you're playing and practicing all year in hot weather, when you go to cold weather, it's going to be a very big adjustment. But I think when he's going to be in it, he's going to be practicing in it. He's going to be working in it, getting more experience in there, and that's going to be where the frame of reference he's coming from. So I don't think that'll be as much of an. I mean, I don't know. It's a guess, obviously, but
right, yeah.
I think the bigger concern for me with Derek Carr has some more to do with how, he doesn't, I mean, nobody loves getting hit, but a big concern with him has been when the offensive line's bad, he holds on to the ball too long. I think he had right up there with Zach Wilson as someone who holds the ball long. It's not like he's scrambling around like Zach either. So that would be my biggest concern with Derek. And, he does throw more interceptions than you'd like, but he is also productive. He's pretty efficient with the ball. He completes, other than this last year, which I think statistically was one of his worst, but I think it was a weird spot he was in Vegas. He usually completes upwards of high 60s, near 70% most years. Over 20 touchdown passes a year, over 4,000 yards a year. This is the best quarterback the Jets would have had in a long time. And He's going to be the kind of guy that Jets fans are going to get infuriated with on a week-to-week basis. There's gonna be some weeks where they love him, others where they hate his guts. But I think
Yeah,
ultimately
yeah.
he's a fine, solid option. And I've seen people say, like, does he raise your ceiling to like Super Bowl level? Well, the Jets haven't been to the playoffs in 12 years. Let's raise their ceiling to the playoffs, and then you figure the rest out later. I think so. I think Derek Carr is good enough to get the Jets to the playoffs. He's better than what they had last year, and he's better than what I think are realistic options for them to get this offseason.
All right, let's evaluate the Derek Carr trade price because it's fascinating. The Raiders are in this unique position that they have this firm deadline on February 15th, and that date won't move. That has been confirmed that Derek Carr is not going to acquiesce and help them by kicking that date down the road to which would open up more opportunities and possibilities. Is he cut? Is he traded? Because Derek Carr has a no trade clause. And for a team that kind of embarrassingly benched him, why would he be trying to do them any favors? Because he would have to accept any deal to any possible team. So there's a lot of, and his contract, obviously, if you trade for him, you're like kind of absorbing that unless you're able to, kind of rip that up in itself. There's a lot of weird variables here. How is it moved? Because in your article today, again, which is linked down below, can't say that enough, the great work of Zack Rosenblatt and the Athletic people, that you mentioned, like that second round pick, that, well, that could be involved potentially in a Derek Carr thing. What is the trade price, and is he even traded at all?
Yeah, I don't think they can get really much just because of they're not really negotiating from a place of strength, especially with the no trade clause and all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. From the Jets' perspective, and again, Carr would have to agree to it. Obviously, I think it makes
Right.
sense to get out in front of it, get the quarterback taken care of in February. Get to him before other teams can bring up the negotiating price and steal him from you. If they really think he's the guy that they want this offseason, I think they should try and trade for him. What is a quality starting quarterback worth? Like if you're not giving up a first round pick for him, I think it's good value no matter what you're even giving up at that point, honestly. So I think it's worth pursuing a trade. I agree with everybody who said that you're better out. Like best case scenario is they wait and they just sign him in free agency. You don't have to trade any draft picks, and then you're able to like replenish your roster that way. But if you have to trade for him, I think it's worth exploring at least.
And I would say, here's the kicker, which we've kind of talked about on this show a little bit in the Derek Carr realm. If the Raiders decide to cut him, any team can sign him well before the league
Yeah.
year kicks off. That'll be kind of a unique loophole. And to your point, as you mentioned in the story, not necessarily for cut reasons, but in general, that whether you cut or trade, you would have quarterback solved and you would be able to figure everything else out by
Yeah.
having your quarterback. A quick follow up on that point. Do you believe that it's 100% going to be the OC hired first, then they pick the quarterback, or vice versa? Is there a chance the quarterback gets picked and he's part of the hiring process, for lack of a better word, to pick the OC that best complements that? Do you have an inkling one way or the other?
Not necessarily. If it's Carr, in theory, I could definitely see a scenario where they have the quarterback first. I guess if you're trading for Rodgers, in theory, I think somebody mentioned that. I think the Stafford trade was pretty early when that happened a
January
couple years ago.
30th. Yep.
Yeah. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, so like if it's Rodgers or Carr, it probably happens early, and maybe that's why they extend this process as much as they can, because the job looks a lot more appealing if you can say, look, it's not hypothetical. We have Derek Carr, we have Aaron
Right.
Rodgers.
Yeah.
The level of appeal for either of those guys, I don't know, is working with Aaron Rodgers as appealing as you would think for like every single offensive coordinator? I don't
Well,
know.
that's true.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and another factor with the Aaron Rodgers thing is you're going to be giving up a lot to trade for him, like a lot, and paying him a lot. And will you be doing that with the guarantee that he's going to play for more than 1 year? Like that's also a thing they're going to have to think about. I mean, I'm sure Woody Johnson isn't really worried about all that. He just wants to get the quarterback.
Right.
But if you're
Yeah.
giving up multiple firsts or whatever it is, you want to know that the guy's going to be there for more than a year. So, especially because, like I said, I don't think they're a quarterback away from the Super Bowl. But, yeah, that's the scenario where I could see the quarterback coming first. If it's not one of those two guys, then you would think that the OC comes first before free agency kind of thing. You want it by then. You ideally want it before the combine, especially as you start scouting these guys and you want to know what kind of offense you're running. But yeah, so I would guess OC is first, but maybe not if Derek Carr is the guy.
All right, I want your gut on this because I feel like we're just on opposite ends. Like for me, I am super optimistic. Again, I want to caveat this and preface this by saying that Aaron Rodgers to be traded anywhere, there's a lot of variables. Aaron Rodgers, yes. Packers, yes. Insert team, yes. In this case, we're trying to make it the Jets. So there's a lot of pieces that have to go through. But I've like this weird feeling. It feels similar to 2008 when they traded for Brett Favre the first time, that like it's going to happen. And I don't really have any sources or anything that are telling me it's going to happen. But I just have a weird gut feel. It seems like, at least from the tone of this, it sounds like that you think this is less likely to happen. Why do you believe it's less likely to happen? Because it feels like there's just a nugget every day. The Adam Schefter thing. There is 0% chance, or whatever he said about the Packers trading Rodgers within the NFC. That eliminates a lot of teams, like the entire NFC South. Now all of a sudden we're talking about this many teams. And then it just seems like every nugget like that we get on a day-to-day basis, it just seems more and more likely. And with Woody Johnson's aggression and want to, it seems hard to believe they would get outbid. So it just puts them in an interesting position. But with all that being considered, why do you feel less so that it's going to happen, I guess?
I'm just more skeptical that Rodgers will want to come to the Jets is the main thing.
Sure.
I
Yeah,
really
that's
think he's
fair.
going to want to
Yeah.
go somewhere he looks at the team as a bona fide contender, and if he comes to the Jets, then he views them as that. So,
Right. Yeah.
I just think that they have a lot of work to do, and I think the offensive coordinator thing makes it less appealing for him. Unless I think if Hackett was the guy, it would help a lot, obviously, because I think they have a really good relationship. But again, I don't know that Hackett wants to work right now, so yeah, I don't know. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I think it absolutely is a possibility, and if he's available, the Jets will absolutely pursue Aaron Rodgers. Like I would imagine Woody would be like, do whatever you have to do to go get him. He doesn't have a no trade clause, so in theory, you could just trade for him and risk that he doesn't want to come to where your team is and all that stuff. Like those are all factors too, but you're giving up a lot for the guy. And again, for me, it just comes down to I don't know. I'm not 100% convinced that he wants to come to the Jets. It's still very early, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Yes. All right, I'm going to use this YouTube super chat we're just getting in. So thank you so much, Fred Flintstone's bodyguard. That's weirdly specific, but nonetheless, Zach, I'll ask you quick gut feel. Do you believe Zach Wilson is on the Jets roster in 2023 week 1 when the season starts?
I do, but I'm not like 100% sure on that, I would say.
Okay. Well, what's your percentage? What point? You're not willing to go 100%. What
I'd say
percentage?
75% sure that he's on the roster,
Okay.
but
Yeah, I'm about the same way. Yeah.
But I also wouldn't rule out a scenario where they get an older guy like Rodgers, and I think they clearly don't view Wilson as like the long term guy. So I don't know if that means you draft somebody or you sign like a younger quarterback, who's looks like a backup, but you can develop a little bit kind of thing. Or even in Mike White, I don't know, somebody like that, just like have as the developmental guy to eventually replace Rodgers. Like I could see that too.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question. I got this from one of my work buddies when he heard I was having you on the show. He sent it in. I'm like, all right, I'll throw it in on the show. So, is there a dark horse candidate you can name at either OC or quarterback or both, if you have it? That's not in your article. No one's talking about it, but it's a potential option at either quarterback or offensive coordinator for the Jets that people aren't talking about. What's a dark horse name for both of those?
I mean, I think Tannehill is the one that just comes to my mind at quarterback. I did mention him in the story.
Okay. Yep.
Offensive coordinator. Man, that's a tough one. I just think
It's
they're
tough
having a hard.
because we would have written about it if
Yeah,
the
yeah.
name would have made sense.
Nah,
Right.
that'd be one I'd have to get back to you on because
Okay.
I don't know because they're having a hard time getting people willing to like take the job is the problem.
Yeah, fair enough. This nugget I found very interesting because I would have assumed the other. In your piece, you talk about letting Mike White walk potentially in free agency, and part of that is if they get a veteran quarterback, you wouldn't expect Mike White to come back. I would have assumed with how the season kind of ended that maybe Mike White's market would have kind of shrunk back to more so reality, and maybe the room is Zach Wilson, Mike White, and whoever the guy, Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers, whoever the guy they bring in. Do you not see it that way?
I don't think he's going to make as much money as he would have if he didn't, get hurt at the end of the year. But I do think he's shown that he's a quality enough backup and maybe capable of being like a bridge guy for a team that needs it, or like the Cardinals who are going to need a quarterback to start the year. Like I think there's going to be interest in him as a backup quarterback. You've seen guys like Jacoby Brissett, Teddy Bridgewater get like decent money, not like amazing, like in the 5 to 10 million range for like a 1-year deal to like be a backup for a young guy. And I can see I think Mike will get that kind of interest. I think they would like to bring Mike back. I just don't, especially because you have Zach Wilson at that like $10 million cap hit. You have whoever the quarterback is they get will probably be closer to like 30 million or whatever it is. It's hard to justify paying 3 different quarterbacks, more than like the minimum essentially, which they did last year. But this would be a little more extreme version of that, and I just don't see that happening.
What's your gut feel on the quarterback room? So, okay, you said that you kind of believe that Derek Carr, and a lot of places I've seen you forced to predict, because I know you love to do that, that I've seen Derek Carr as one of your guys, and Zach Wilson, 75%. He's the guy. If that's the room, what's your gut say? Who is the third guy in that room? Because I would expect the Jets would probably bring at least three quarterbacks to camp outside of our boy Strevler. Our love sent out to him, who signed a reserve future contract. But who would be the third guy if you had to guess?
I I would guess a rookie at that point. If they're bringing in a third
Interesting.
quarterback,
Okay.
that would be my guess.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, I guess you could, in theory, bring back someone like Flacco or somebody like that. But and again, I wouldn't like 100% rule out Mike White. But yeah, I think the idea of like developing somebody, because I think they just view Zach. If somebody comes in with a great offer, maybe they get rid of Zach. But I think they view him more as a sunk cost, like for the future. I think they're still committed to like developing him, and maybe they get lucky, and all this motivates him in a way that gets it back to what they thought they were getting, and their starter gets hurt and he goes in and he plays really well, kind of thing. But I would expect more a developmental rookie. But I'm not saying maybe not first, second round, but maybe they draft somebody later in the draft to develop, like a Brock Purdy type.
Yeah, I'm seeing this a few times. Dave from New Brunswick saying, "Y'all cousins." Yes, I guess this is the time I was expected to officially announce. Yes, me and Zach Rosenblatt with the glasses and beard are indeed cousins.
Yeah.
So,
I
the
don't
cat's
know
out
if
of the
you get.
bag.
I don't know if you get this, but anytime somebody wears glasses and has a beard like me, they think I'm related to that person. It's very, very it's stereotyping us bearded people that we're all
It
related.
is. It's not right, to be honest with you. One of the ones I don't know if you get this one, Zach. I've gotten at least 100 tweets, and it's probably more than that over the life of it. They're like, "Oh, Rodrigo Blankenship." I'm like, "No, I'm not Rodrigo Blankenship, the kicker guy." So every once in a while, they're like, "I haven't seen you and Rodrigo Blankenship in the same room." I'm like, "Well, I guess that's true," but I get a lot of that. I get a lot of that in the old Twitter sphere. So, guys, thank you for that. As I'm seeing those comments pour in on that front. Zach, a quick one, and I haven't heard anyone talk about this, and maybe it can't be until the offensive coordinator is hired. Maybe that will determine a lot of these other roster spots. James Robinson, do the Jets want him back? Because, like RFA, the money will be a little less than what it would be for sometimes players out in the open market, but obviously things didn't go swimmingly at the back end. Did the Jets want James Robinson back?
I would be surprised if he came back. I would say James Robinson almost definitely does not want to come back. You could kind of see it at the end of the season how unhappy he was. So I'd be surprised. I just think you just take that as a loss, that trade. And I do think they need to add a running back, whether that's in the draft or a cheap veteran, because I don't think you can rely on Brees returning to form at least right away. Historically, it just doesn't happen for guys who get torn ACLs, especially at that position. So, it's a deep free agency class of running back. You usually can find a good one in the middle rounds. I think they need to do that this offseason.
I would ask for a name, but is that also going to depend on the scheme for who that running back in the room would probably be, and probably the same at a few positions?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think they need a receiver as well, especially because they're probably going to cut Corey Davis and maybe Barrios as well. So they need a receiver, need a running back, need a quarterback, need offensive line. Other than that, their offense is great.
Right. Yeah, that's it. Besides all that, they're in the Super Bowl. I love it here. Breaking news from Zach Rosenblatt. Zach, another one in the article, which I found fascinating. I've heard a lot of people mention the potential of cutting Carl Lawson, but you have cut or trade Carl Lawson. Again, he's coming off, quite frankly, a pretty good year, relatively speaking, the most sacks he's had since 2017. Carl Lawson trade, that's the first time I've heard that. Hey, can you give me any more on that and what he could fetch and things of that nature? That one to me was super fascinating. It makes sense with kind of the contract structure too.
I mean, it probably wouldn't wind up being for much. It's one of those where the teams know that you're getting rid of him anyway, kind of thing. I think the Giants tried to do that with James Bradbury last year and couldn't find anybody willing to trade for him. The key would be the Jets not telegraphing that they want to get rid of him anyway, if they can somehow pull that off. But more likely is that he's cut than traded. But I like you said, he's a talented defensive end, premium position. He's pretty young. I think he's gonna be 28 this summer. Like, he's not young, but he's not like past his prime or anything. If you can, I would try to keep him, but it's just hard for me to see, if they actually plan on like improving this roster through free agency and stuff like that, and the quarterback position. And it's going to be hard to keep him because you can save so much money without any dead cap penalty with him. So I lean towards them cutting him. Maybe if somebody came in and offered them something decent, I think a few years back, Calais Campbell, when he was traded from the Cardinals to the Ravens, I believe it was. They only gave up like a 5th-round pick to get him, or a
Yeah, that's
4th-round
right.
pick, something like that. And he's like one of the best players, defensive lineman in the league. So I could see something like that maybe playing out. But yeah, I wouldn't say I'd be surprised if Carl Lawson was on the roster, but I'm leaning that way.
All right, let's go with a couple quickies, and then we'll get you out of here. Dwayne Brown, did you get any sense? I assumed once we heard the torn rotator cuff, that was an Ian Rappaport report, and he played through it. And I'm like, well, this dude, he's playing through, and props to him for playing through it. But obviously, he's going to get the surgery and retire at the end of the year. Is that a foregone conclusion, or is there a real chance they could bring him back?
I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. I think he fought through that because he clearly wants to keep playing. So I think it ultimately comes down to how that surgery goes. If the Jets can decide to cut him ultimately if they wanted to save some money. You don't save a lot, but you can save some. I know they really like him in the building. Great leader. He's solid even with the injury. So when he's healthy, you'd think he'd be better. Maybe he's not ready at the beginning of the year or something like that. But I think you want a veteran in there if you really are trying to get Mekhi Becton going. It wouldn't be the worst thing to have Dwayne Brown around, or at least to push him. So I'm open to bringing him back, I would say.
All right, Zach, you have in here, never rule out Joe Douglas trying to make a splash in free agency. And the two positions you mentioned are offensive tackle and safety. Okay, where are we diving, baby? I'm ready to get the scuba gear on. Where's the splash, baby?
I I would guess it would be at safety, though. I can see it at offensive tackle as well. I think, I'm not convinced that he's necessarily going to go to the top of the free agency market. I think that a lot of times doesn't work out, especially if you're trying to. I think you saw that after that year. I think it was with Todd Bowles where they went and spent a lot of money the offseason after that,
Right. Good times. Yeah.
and it didn't work out that well. So you want to be smart about it, but I at safety, I think if they cut Jordan Whitehead, I think that might be a sign that they're going after somebody that's at the top of the market. I listed a few guys in the article. Jesse Bates, I think, is the big name. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's a free agent. Von Bell, I think there's another one that's Jordan Poyer.
Jordan Poyer, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure all of them will hit free agency necessarily. I think Bates will because it seems like they kind of had some issues with the negotiations. But yeah, if they were going to make a splash, my prediction would be safety, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
And just on the other one, on the offensive tackles, you mentioned some big names. Orlando Brown, like that, reportedly what he declined. I mean, we're talking mega money here. Could that be something that the Jets are willing to dive into, especially with the uncertainty revolving around Mekhi Becton?
I mean, if Brown hit free agency, maybe. And he was with the Ravens for a while, and there are those ties to Douglas and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd be surprised if that was what wind up happening, unless Dwayne Brown has to retire. I think for them to even consider going after these guys, I don't think they would bring Dwayne Brown back and spend a lot on one of those guys. But I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. That's what's so fascinating about this offseason is one of the offensive line, because they have so much to take care of there, and guys hitting free agency and question marks at tackle, and what's Mekhi, what's Max Mitchell, what's AVT going to play? There's a lot up in the air, and so I think we're going to see it all play out based on what Joe does this offseason.
And this is the last one. Quincy Williams. This one, it's weird because, of course, he's the brother of Quinnen, and Quinnen is a guy that could be extended. Is there a direct correlation here that Quinnen's like, hey, Quincy, this is a package deal here? I mean, I guess he does have the weight to be able to swing that kind of thing because of how important he is to the team. Is there that direct correlation there, potential with Quinnen and Quincy? Because that seems like a difficult negotiation, knowing that in the back of your head if you're Joe Douglas or the Jets.
Yeah, I mean, I would think bringing Quincy back would certainly not hurt the negotiations with Quinnen. My whole thing though is I think you're gonna have to reduce CJ Mosley's cap hit, so he's not 100% locked to come back. But I don't know that you can afford to keep both him and Quincy, because I think Quincy's going to command a decent amount of money. I think he's pretty well liked around the league, so I think he'd make pretty good money in the open market. And I don't know if you want to get in the habit of overpaying linebackers. I don't think that's the right way to operate. I think Joe Douglas learned a lot from Howie Roseman, and Howie Roseman does not, invest in linebackers generally. It's usually pass rushers, defensive linemen, and secondary on defense. So that's why I think they would let him go. The Quinnen factor does make it interesting, but if the negotiations get to a point where Quincy is asking for, top 10 linebacker money, top 15 linebacker money, which gets in the 10 million per year range, I don't know that they're going to do that.
All right. Again, Zack Rosenblatt of The Athletic joined us here on the show. Zach, before we get you out of here, what are the vacation plans? Do you have anything juicy planned for your off season here? Somewhere festive, somewhere sexy?
I'm still sorting through that. There are some discussions about Ireland potentially, so
Whoa, that would be
hoping to make that work.
amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be freaking amazing. I have a passport. I got it for the show Survivor. I haven't made it on the show. I've applied a few times. So, again, keep an eye out for CBS, apparently, if I ever make it on. So, I've not punched it yet, but Ireland, oh, baby. Zach, I hope you and your people, I mean, I hope based, after these last couple hits at The Athletic, I hope the pay bump already, you should be going back to the table, slamming it in front of old, I know it's not Joe Douglas, but saying, hey, come on, I need some Ireland money here. I think you may have a case, pal. I think you may have a case.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, we'll see. We'll try to do what we can. Zach, thank you so much for taking the time, brother. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, man.
There he is, Zack Rosenblatt of The Athletic, everybody. Make sure you check out the full article below. It is in the link in the description on YouTube. Thanks, everybody. See ya.